As I'm sitting down to record this, it's been less than 12 hours since the decision was promulgated by the Supreme Court at long last, after over a month of suspense, striking down Roe v. Wade and returning sovereignty over the issue of abortion back to the states. And even in these short few hours, there's already been hundreds of hours of analysis, such as it is. Thousands of gallons of ink have already been spilled, but you know what we haven't heard? From any of the emotionally incontinent basket cases that currently pass for our journalist class? Here's a hint. It's the same thing we've never heard for the entire half century during which Roe v. Wade was established judicial precedent. Namely, any sort of legalistic argument for why this decision is bad and unconstitutional, or why Roe, conversely, was good and constitutional. Instead, all we get is people stating their personal value preferences. And included on that list, astoundingly, is the Chief Justice of the United States himself, John Roberts, who wrote a very loosely concurring opinion in this case that, even by the very low standards of John Roberts, is just an embarrassing load of legally incoherent garbage that would probably get a first-year law student laughed out of the classroom. The Roberts opinion effectively comes down to, okay, it's true, I agree, Roe was a very poorly reasoned decision, but I still would have preferred to leave it in place. He even stated it exactly like that, as a personal preference. He even used the words, I prefer, a value judgment, which if you had any doubt over whether Roberts is a fellow traveler of the liberal judicial activists on the court, that one statement right there ought to dispel it. For John Roberts and the other liberals on the court, the way you rule on cases is you take your personal preference, your desired outcome, you declare it constitutional, and then reverse engineer some tenuous rationale for issuing the ruling that comports with the way you think things ought to be. Now, and like I said, even by Roberts' normal standards, which are not lofty, this thing is a monument to judicial activism and intellectual incuriousness. So it was really delicious that Clarence Thomas, who is a great legal mind and an outstanding writer, two things the Chief Justice decidedly is not, in his own concurring opinion went directly after Roberts and explained in no uncertain terms why his concurrence is intellectually indefensible and legally incoherent. For his part, President and semi-animated cadaver Joe Biden, he says he's got an easy solution. According to the president, all Congress has to do is pass a law enshrining the parameters of Roe v. Wade into the United States Code. Bob's your uncle. There you go. Congressional Democrats have had 50 years in which to do so, but they've never made any such attempt, even during the periods when they've held majorities where they could have passed it very easily. And since Joe Biden was a member of Congress for 36 years and president of the Senate for a further 8 years, he's probably a guy who should know full well why no such attempt has been made in all these decades. But then again, the man's brain is pretty much a bowl of jello at this point, so it's entirely possible that he just forgot. Like he forgot how to tell the difference between his wife and his sister. So, Mr. President, if you're watching tonight, I have a quick refresher for you. Congress has never attempted to codify Roe because if you pass that law, it's going to very quickly come up for judicial review. And in the course of that judicial review, the government's lawyers will have to argue that, well, this law is constitutional under the precedent of Roe v. Wade, which, of course, would then trigger a review of the constitutionality of Roe itself, which Roe would not withstand because it's never been constitutional, and it's the most poorly reasoned Supreme Court decision probably since Dred Scott in 1856. So for half a century now, Roe has been a real catch-22 for the Democrats. They can't codify it in the law because if they try, the ultimate result will be Roe itself getting thrown out and declared unconstitutional. So when you listen to all the blubbering and the bloviating in the coming days, make a mental note of how much of it is just emotional caterwauling and restatements of personal value judgments. Because that number is going to be pretty close to 100%. And bear in mind also that none of these people have actually read the decision that they're decrying, just as they have never read the text of Roe v. Wade, which they venerate as an object of religious devotion, despite its having been handed down by a court of 9 elderly white males. And despite its having established a standard that today's leftists would regard as unacceptably restrictive. Remember, when the Supreme Court decides a case, it's not like a criminal case where it's guilty or not guilty. It's not like a civil case where one party is held liable or not liable for an injury done to another party when the Supreme Court agrees to hear a case. It means both parties have legitimate rights and legitimate interests, and the court's job is to find where the pivot point is, where the one should be balanced against the other. In Roe, the court held that the state has a legitimate interest in new citizens being born, and the state is within its rights to establish policy which promotes that interest, up to and including a total ban on abortion. But the court also held, based on logic they pulled directly out of their bottom holes, that pregnant women have a countervailing legitimate interest insofar as being able to choose that they want to terminate an unwanted or a dangerous pregnancy. The court, having identified these countervailing interests, then left itself having to find where and how to reconcile the one with the other. And since their reasoning was already dubious in the extreme, they didn't leave themselves much of an option but to just invent a number and be done and call it a day, which is how we got the 16-week standard, which, I don't know, it sounds a lot to me like 9 white male judges making decisions about women's bodies, but I guess that logic only holds when it's an undesired outcome. But if you tell a current-day abortion activist that the majority opinion in Roe v. Wade explicitly acknowledges the right of the state to issue blanket abortion bans after the 16-week mark, not only will they not believe you, but you probably will get tarred and feathered by an angry mob of purple-haired land whales, if not lynched outright. But today's crop of abortion cheerleaders, they don't want any part of a 16-week limit, or any other limit for that matter. Abortion rights have to extend up until the child's first day of kindergarten, or else we will not have true reproductive justice, because pregnancy and motherhood, they are not things to be cherished and celebrated. They are afflictions, burdens, curses even. You'll be much happier in life if you go to college, get yourself some worthless bachelor's degree, and then spend the remainder of your childbearing years working off your student loans in the cubicle farm down at the widget factory. That is what freedom looks like, ladies. And speaking of ladies, I have a question for you, Jim Eagle. Have you noticed that the women who shriek the loudest about abortion rights almost invariably are childless or postmenopausal? Seriously, name me a prominent female Democrat who is of childbearing age and actually has kids. You can't do it, can you? I know I sure as hell can't. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where, with yesterday's birthday, the host has now outlived both Admiral Lord Nelson and Sir Ernest Shackleton. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I want to drop a scenario on you. Can I drop a scenario on you? Let's suppose Joe Biden had to drive himself to the filling station and put gas in his own car. How do you imagine that would go? Oh, in fact, what's a reasonable guess for how long it's been since Joe Biden ever drove a car to a gas station and filled his own tank? Better yet, how long do you suppose it's been since Joe Biden purchased anything from any retail establishment without any assistance from staffers or underlings? 30 years? 40? 50? How long do you think it's been since Joe Biden had a conversation with a small business owner? Do you think that has ever happened? The reason I'm asking all this is because I continue to be astounded, and I imagine I'm not the only one, at how impossibly out of touch this man with the everyday experiences of the people whose lives he has been trying to ruin, and with some success, for the past 18 months now. From some of the things he says, one gets the impression that Joe's mental calendar is still stuck on 1978, and he imagines that's the world in which the rest of us are still living. When's the last time you saw a biracial couple on a TV commercial? You have to be really profoundly disconnected from the culture to ask that question with a straight face. And this guy asks questions like that all the freaking time. Did you leave the record player on at night? You get the point, but I could go on with the examples for quite some time. There is no shortage of them. The reason I brought up the scenario about the gas station is because Joe Biden seems to think the people who own and operate gas stations are the people who set the price of gasoline. Day before yesterday, he gets up there at the podium. He announces he wants to do a 90-day federal gas tax holiday, and he slaps himself on the back furiously about how this is going to knock 16 cents off the price of a gallon, which I don't know about you guys, but 16 cents won't even get my price down to $6. So thanks a bunch, Joe. And then he does an amazing thing. He waves his bony old finger at the camera. He switches into his angry grandpa voice, and he flat out orders gas station proprietors, whom he refers to as the people who set the prices, to cut their prices immediately. Do it now. Do it today, he scolds, as if your average gas station lessee is some sort of industrial tycoon who has nothing better to do than hoard stacks of cash like freaking Scrooge McDuck. This man does not live in the real world. I wonder how long it's been since he actually met someone who lives in the real world. In the real world, people who own gas stations operate on some of the tightest margins in all of retail commerce. The margins are so tight, I have wondered for years why anybody in their right mind would get into the gas station business. But people do, and we need them to. And they deserve better than a doddering dumbass of a president who wants to scapegoat them for a problem that is 1,000% his own creation. Now, Joe Biden has now weaponized his own ignorance to go after some of the hardest working, most underappreciated small business owners in the entire country. Because he would much rather cast aspersions on your character. You, the guy who's running a 6-pump filling station, struggling to keep his family afloat, rather than to acknowledge the possibility that his god-awful policies might be god-awful policies. Because I hate to be the one to break it to you, Joe, but when you start out as the first order of business on your first day, by kneecapping domestic energy production and surrendering our oil independence, and then the price of gas more than doubles within 17 months, you did that. You did it on purpose. You did it by yourself. Oil companies did not do it. Vladimir Putin didn't do it. And the owners of service stations sure as hell didn't do it. If you need a reminder, I've got some stickers I can send you. Give me a shout. It does take a real rat bastard son of a bitch of a political leader to scapegoat his people for the problems caused by his own shitty performance. It takes a man, frankly, with no grasp of basic decency. It takes a man completely divorced from ground-level reality and the experiences of the people who lived there. But Joe Biden makes it hard sometimes to discern where the dividing line is between drooling incompetence and hubristic narcissism. He's got both bases covered, but it can be a struggle determining where the one ends and where the other begins, which brings us to the note card. If you haven't heard about the note card yet, well, then I'm glad I get to be the bearer of hilarious news. So it seems that Joe's White House staffers, or elder abusers, as the case may be, they have grown very frustrated with the president's penchant for acting like a confused octogenarian. So now they're giving him note cards, which contain stage cues, is the best way to describe it. Previously, they used to put the stage cues on the teleprompter screen, but then Joe kept accidentally reading them out loud, so they had to stop. After the third or fourth time, he shuffled up to the podium and opened with, "Enter room, say hello." So they write this stuff on little cards now, and Joe carries the little cards around, and this system was working about as well as can be expected, right up until Joe inexplicably held the note card up in front of his face just long enough for one of the photographers in the room to snap a picture, which he then duly zoomed in on because he wondered what the writing on this card said. And as it turns out, it was a detailed list of instructions to help the president get through this 90-second long engagement without stepping on any rakes or pissing up any trees. You enter the room. You take your seat. You greet the people in the room. You answer one question from such and such reporter. And I'm only raising my voice because on the card, all the subjective personal pronouns are in all caps. So I feel like I should shout them. But I don't know. Am I the only one detecting a slightly passive-aggressive tinge to this thing? I don't want to say it's elder abuse, but the detail in the stage cues and the use of all caps, doesn't it evince a certain frustration on the part of the composer? Like, damn it, Grandpa, we stop screwing this stuff up every time. Don't make me send you to bed with no matlock again, Grandpa. And stop crapping the bed, too. Damn it. And I guess since we're on the subject of crapping the bed, let's go ahead and ask the uncomfortable question that is in all of our heads right now. If he needs written instructions for entering a room and sitting down, what else do you suppose he needs written instructions for? Title: Joe's Potty Time. Number 1, you enter the lavatory. Number 2, you raise the toilet lid. Number 3, you lower your trousers. Number 4, you turn around and assume a squatting posture. Number 5, you gently lower yourself down onto the seat. Title: Joe's TV Time. Number 1, you select a VHS tape from the shelf. Number 2, you insert the tape, label side up, into the VCR. Number 3, you gently grasp the remote control. Number 4, you press the power button. Number 5, you press the button with the arrow to play the tape. I heard they tried to upgrade him to a DVD player, but it was just a lost cause. He said, "No, damn it, I hate those little silver gramophone records. They always ruin my turntable." And in some twisted, depraved way, I don't know what I'd do without Joe Biden. When you do what I do and Joe Biden is the president, you never have to worry about writer's block or running out of comedy material. It's like a bottomless basket of low-hanging fruit that's always replenishing itself automatically. But today is a great day, and there's nothing President Corpsey Cadaverton can do about it, because for the first time in a hell of a long time, arguably for the first time in my newly 48-year-old life, federalism has won. Seriously, when was the last time there was a meaningful rollback and dismantling of central government power? I don't really have any emotional attachment to the abortion issue like some other people do, but I have cause for celebration today just the same, because I am a big fan of the federalist system of government that our founders established. If there are 2 overarching principles in our founding, they are these. Number 1, the fount of government power is the consent of the governed. And number 2, people have the right, in so much as possible, to govern themselves at the local level according to the values and the social mores of their own communities. Thus, when Roe v. Wade gets relegated to the dustbin of historical dumbassery, irrespective of your views on the moral propriety of abortion itself, it's an advancement for the cause of personal autonomy. People who wish to live in a place with abortion on demand through the 67th month of pregnancy, they can do that. People who wish to live in a place where there's a blanket prohibition on abortion, they can do that too. If the idea of America means anything, doesn't it mean individuals should have the option of living among like-minded people whose values and priorities are more or less in accordance with their own? Much of the story of our nation is a story of groups of people migrating from one part of the country to another part, whether it's in search of economic opportunity or social equality, or a community in which one feels like one belongs. The Democrats and the news media, but I repeat myself, they love to frame the abortion issue as evil, patriarchal men forcing women to bear children against their will. In fact, it's often implicit in their arguments that 100% of all women support legal abortion on demand. And of course, that's not remotely true. If you take a crowd shot of any pro-life event, you will always see a lot more women than men. And unlike a pro-abortion crowd, let's just say the ladies in the pro-life crowd, on average, are much more likely to be impregnated than the shrill, screeching harpies with neck tattoos in the pro-abortion crowd. If all women supported abortion, there would be no controversy. It would just be legal everywhere. But they don't. There are millions upon millions of women who would be very happy to live in a place where abortion was banned, and they wouldn't feel for one moment like their feminine rights were being infringed upon. And there is a certain irony in that, or a certain cartoonish hypocrisy, if you prefer, in the fact that these same Democrats who claim to speak on behalf of all women, to be the guardians of women's health care and women's reproductive rights, they're the same people who have been working tirelessly for some years now to erase the distinction between men and women, to invite big hulking dudes to compete in women's sports, and to make sure that ladies' restrooms and locker rooms are always overflowing with male sex organs and the men they are attached to. So that's really an airtight moral worldview. No internal contradiction there at all. And we will leave it there and adjourn for the week. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Here's what's missing. Let's do that again. Thanks for watching. Have a pleasant weekend. Do not comply. See you Monday. Get off my lawn.